When I pulled up to the Porter house, Jeff was already walking up to the porch. The sun had set and the sound of crickets filled my ears. When I got out of my truck, I saw that the front door of the house had been left open. Jeff froze when he got to the doorway. He stared down in front of him, then he slowly moved his head, looking around the room. He turned around, ran to the porch railing, and threw up. When he stopped, he told me he was going to man the radio. When I got to the door, I understood why. If it wasn't for my time in the war, I would have done the same thing. Jack Porter's body was on the floor a foot or two past the door. His right forearm laid a few feet from him, with his hand crushed at the knuckles. Mary's body lay next to her husband's with her head a few feet away. The rest of the bodies were in a similar way. The walls of the house had pieces of the family splattered on it. Their scattered bodies were only intact enough for us to count 14 victims. We figured it was Jack, Mary, all 6 of Jack's brothers, and 6 of their 7 boys. There was one missing, their youngest son, Jake. Leading up to that day, Jake had been plagued by nightmares and the belief that he was being watched. That's where the official story comes from. Jake Porter had been losing his mind, and on his 18th birthday finally snapped, killing his whole family during his party. But that's not what happened. There was no way one scrawny 18-year-old could do this to a dozen people. I walked into the kitchen to see old Bones picking up a hunting rifle next to a body. The top of the head had been crushed, but it looked like Jack's oldest boy, Brian. Bones racked the bolt back and a spent casing flew out. On the ground next to the stove was a deformed slug. It reminded me of a slug a friend of mine had pulled out of a deer he shot once, but at that range it shouldn't have been in the house, let alone the same room. Jeff ran in and told us that the clerk at the gas station called in. Said Jake Porter was with him with blood all over him, looking like he had seen a ghost. Bones told me to go and take him to the station. I jumped in my truck, looked at the gas gauge, and thought, well, it's a good thing I'm going to the gas station. It took me about 5 minutes to get there. I parked next to one of the pumps and hurried to the door. I got about halfway when Jake came running out. I thought he was coming after me, so I got ready to fight him. But he just ran to my truck and jumped in. He started yelling for me to get to the truck and get out of there. I was so confused I just stood there for a minute. Then I heard the bell on the gas station door ring. A man in sweatpants and a brown shirt was strolling towards me. He had a slouch in his walk and he kept his hands in his pockets. He stopped a few feet from me and with a half smirk said,
"Good evening."
"Good evening, Mr.
Ethan. Mr. Ethan. But my friends call me Levi."
He offered his hand for me to shake. I started to reach for it out of habit, but I saw blood on it and remembered Jake's hand and arm. My eyes wandered to the gas station window. I saw the clerk's body slumped over the counter and blood splattered on the back wall. I started walking backwards from him. Mr. Ethan looked over his shoulder at the window.
"Oh, don't mind that. Just part of the job,"
I said. "And what job is that, Mr. Ethan?"
"I've been hired by some people, the Axiom cult or something, to bring Mr. Porter back to them. Something about sacrificing him to start the apocalypse. I don't know."
I drew my weapon. "Put your hands on your head and turn around. You're under arrest," he said.
"Nah."
He took a step forward. I didn't hesitate. Blood splattered from his head, and his body went limp, collapsing on the ground. Jake shouted from the truck,
"We have to go! Deputy, we have to go!"
I didn't understand why he wanted to run. Then I saw Mr. Ethan start to move. His body rolled over on its stomach and pushed itself up. He turned to face me, and I watched the slug pop out while the hole I had just put in his head closed. He locked eyes with me and smiled. He said,
"Tisk, tisk, Deputy. That wasn't very wise."
I ran and dove into the truck. I almost broke the shifter putting it into gear before peeling out. I watched him in the rear view as we sped away. What bothered me the most was how relaxed he seemed about the whole thing. Like being shot in the head wasn't even a bother to him. Jake told me one of his brothers had done the same thing with his hunting rifle, with about the same effect. I asked him what the cult thing was about. Mr. Ethan had explained to him that the cult thought he was some chosen child that only comes around every few thousand years. If they perform some ritual sacrifice with him, the apocalypse will start. I grabbed my radio. "Bones, come in, it's Riggs."
"I'm here, son. Did you find Jake?"
"Yes, sir, but he didn't kill him. It was this other guy. He calls himself Mr. Ethan. White male between 5'10" and 6 feet, late 30s with dark hair and green eyes, wearing sweatpants, sandals, and a brown cotton shirt."
"Waylon, slow down."
My heart stopped pounding in my throat and I was able to catch my breath. I looked over at Jake and saw he was calming down too.
"Is Jake with you now?"
"Yes, sir. This Ethan guy is trying to take him to some cult."
"Okay, just bring Jake back to the station. I'll handle it."
I thought about what Ethan had done to the clerk and the porters, and how shooting him didn't do anything. I said, "I don't think that's a good idea. I think I should take him to the black site. It's closer, and don't those guys handle stuff like this?"
"No, don't take him there. I don't know exactly what they'll do, but it's best you bring him here."
"I can't. He'll kill everyone there."
"I won't let that happen, son."
"I'm sorry, Bones." I put my mic down and shut off the radio. I didn't want to keep arguing with him. I told Jake about the incident with Arlo in the box. I told him if anyone could handle Ethan in the cult, it was the black site. We just had to make it there. Then, my truck ran out of gas. We had to walk. We left the truck there in the middle of the road and made our way to the tree line to stay out of sight. We stayed just inside of it as we moved. There wasn't a lot of light from the moon to navigate, but my training from Sergeant Green kicked in. During the war, our squad only did missions at night. He trained us to use all our senses to navigate the darkest areas. I kept having to remind myself that Jake couldn't move like I could. We made it about a mile when we heard something flying through the air. I wasn't sure what it was at first. Then I realized that whatever it was huge, and it was flying right towards us. I grabbed Jake by the arm and dragged him back further into the woods. I hoped to get more protection from the trees, but I could hear it getting closer fast. I shoved him down and dropped on top of him, trying to cover him up. That's when I heard the crash. I felt the wood shake with the impact and debris flew all around us. The sound of twisting metal and breaking glass filled my ears. I looked back and saw what I already knew. It was my truck wrapped around an oak. This told me 3 things. 1, Mr. Ethan can lift up a truck and throw it. 2, in the time that it took us to cover 1 mile, he covered 10. 3, and most importantly, somehow he knew exactly where the Porter kid was. I knew we weren't going to beat him to the black site before he caught up to us. And then I remembered where we were. I pulled Jake up to his feet and took him deeper in the woods. I hoped that we could make it to the quarry before Mr. Ethan caught up to us. It only took a minute or 2, but we managed to get to the back edge of that pit. I told him to climb down on the rock face, but only a little bit. I just wanted him down low enough to make it look like he was trying to climb into that pit. I warned him not to look down. He said he wasn't afraid of heights, and I told him that's not why I didn't want him looking down. He started climbing, and I ran over to hide myself in the trees a bit more and drew my weapon. I only had to wait about a minute before I saw Mr. Ethan walking up to the edge. He looked down the pit and I heard him say something that sounded like he was surprised to see what was at the bottom. I walked out of the woods until he was directly between me and the pit. I tried to be as quiet as I could. I raised my weapon at his head and took careful aim. He must have heard me because he turned around. He looked a little confused. He asked,
"Didn't you try that already?"
I said not quite, and pulled the trigger. His head snapped back and his body went limp, falling over Jake and down into the pit. I didn't want to waste any time. I holstered my weapon, ran over and helped Jake up. The rest of the way, we didn't slow down. We moved as fast as we could to the black site's gate. When we got there, I called out to the gate guards. "This is Deputy Waylon Riggs. I forced myself to catch my breath. "I need to speak to the Deputy Director of Security, Jesse Lynch. We're being chased by a cult." 4 of them ran up to me and held us at gunpoint. I put my hands up and cooperated. They took my pistol and had me sit on the ground. I saw another guard call into his radio. The voice on the other end said the director was coming. I watched the woods for any sign of Ethan while we waited. It wasn't long before I saw a group of guards walking through the gate with who I could tell was Lynch's boss, Director of Security, Andrew Mullins. He was damn near the polar opposite of Sheriff Bones. Where Bones was a beanpole, Mullins was a walking barrel. Bones moved with a relaxed demeanor. Mullins walked with such an intensity I could swear you could feel the ground shake. When Bones looked at you or spoke to you, you got the sense that everything was going to be okay. When Mullins looked at you, you got the sense that he was about to wring your neck. I was more nervous around him than I was Ethan. He looked at Jake and then me. He pointed at me and said,
"You're that deputy that Lynch told me about. Why are you here?"
I explained everything to him.
"So you're being chased by a human-looking monster that wants to take this kid back to a cult. That cult will then perform a ritual sacrifice of the kid and bring on the apocalypse. And the kid that they can sacrifice only comes around once every 1,000 years. Does that sum it up, boy?"
I nodded.
"Well, that's easy."
I felt a wave of relief when he said that. I started to thank him, but he pulled his pistol and shot behind me. Thinking he saw Ethan, I spun around and reached for my pistol that wasn't there. But I didn't see Ethan. I just saw the body of a young man lying face down with a hole in his head. It wasn't until I heard Mullins tell him to burn the body just in case that I realized what had happened. I spun around and lunged at him. His fist met my face before I could react, knocking me to the ground. 2 of his guards held me down while I screamed and cursed his name. I tried to fight the guards off, but one kicked me in the stomach. I felt the air rush out of my lungs. Mullins leaned down and talked to me through clenched teeth.
"Listen here, deputy. You think I'm the bad guy? You let yourself get chased by something you can't stop, trying to protect one person and put the rest of the world in danger. Why? Because you have some kind of moral obligation to that kid? Was that one life worth more than everyone else's? Do you know how often I have to deal with something like this? I don't have the time to house your problem when the solution is this simple. I just saved the world, and it only cost one life. How many lives were you ready to sacrifice just to protect one? You need to learn the difference between what's right and what's necessary."
The 2 guards held me down as he walked away. They didn't let me up until the gate closed. One of them gave me back my pistol and gave me the "don't try anything stupid" look. Then all the guards went back to their posts as if nothing happened. I just stood there shocked. The guards were just standing at their posts, scanning the area as if it were just business as usual. No Mullins, no Jake Porter, not even a word between them about what just happened. After a while, I found myself starting back down the gravel road. I followed the road in a daze, watching the blood drip from my nose onto the ground. I wished that I'd listened to Bones. I didn't know what he could have done, but it had to have been better than that. What Mullins said repeated in my head the whole walk down. I kept thinking about how indifferent they all were about it. Like killing a kid was just another day to them. Worst of all, I couldn't think of a way that Mullins was wrong. I looked up when I heard the crunching of gravel in front of me. It was Ethan. He stopped in the middle of the road. His clothes were torn, and he looked like he was picking something from his teeth. At the time, I wouldn't have cared if he killed me.
Deputy, I don't know what exactly those things were in that pit, but I'll admit, you've made this job much harder than I expected. Now, where's our friend?
Dead. He eyed me, trying to decide if I was telling the truth. I stared back. I noticed his eyes were yellow with a long vertical pupil. I guess my busted nose was proof to him. He nodded and said,
I believe you, but that's not going to save you.
He took a step towards me as headlights came up the road. The car stopped a few yards behind Ethan, and Bones got out of the driver's seat. I could tell by the way he looked at me that he knew what happened. Ethan looked at him, and for the first time, he didn't seem so relaxed.
And who might you be?
Orville Bonaventure. I'm the sheriff of Yuka County.
Well, Sheriff,
I know what you are.
Bones was firm but calm.
It's best if you leave.
Ethan's jaw dropped. He glared at Bones for a good minute. Bones either didn't notice or he didn't care. He started to take a step and said,
Well, if you really do know what I am, then you know...
Leave.
I saw Ethan tense up, his foot still hovering over the ground. He pulled it back and made his way off the road away from us.
One more thing, Mr. Ethan. I don't think I've said this in about 30 years, but if you ever step foot in my county again, I will kill you.
Ethan bared his teeth. I saw them start to grow and sharpen as he let out a hiss. Bones raised one eyebrow and shook his head. Ethan's teeth went back to normal as he turned and walked away. Bones looked at me. He didn't say I told you so or how I should have listened to him. He just said,
Let's get you home.
We were quiet for most of the drive. When he parked in front of my house, I told him everything. I told him how I couldn't get Mullins' words out of my head, that I couldn't reason out an argument to it. It seemed logical. On paper, it sounded right. I told him how, despite all that, it made me sick.
Well, son, that sounds like all the argument against it you need.